donation. Today, we are going to get into the nitty-gritty of different relationship options that embryo donors and recipients can have with each other. And I guess we'll just start by acknowledging that we know that people are joining us from all different places and parts in their journey and things like that. And so we're going to do our best to touch upon a lot of this stuff, but it's a lot to get through. And so we're just going to try to keep it concise and really specific to relationship options. And we know that sometimes there is no relationship between donors and recipients. That's my situation. So we'll talk about like an unknown relationship too. A couple housekeeping things. If you weren't able to tune into our first webinar, which was more of an embryo donation 101, it is available on our website, empowerdonation.com. Is that our website? Yes. And I mentioned earlier that we'll have a Q&A at the end. So if you have anything that you're really thinking about or wanting us to cover, please put that in the chat today. And then at the end of this, we're going to send or email you a survey as well. And we really appreciate if you can fill that out. It really helps us to know what people are interested in, but that's another place for us to know what people really want to hear. We're going to be doing 3 more webinars after this. And one is going to be specifically about how to talk to children about donor conception and embryo donation. We had a lot of people ask about that. So we're going to touch upon that today and then expand on it at other times. So is there anything else that I'm missing for housekeeping? I think that's it. Jen is going to introduce us.
Actually, one housekeeping item I just wanted to just share was that if you do put a question in the chat, it's only coming to us, so you don't have to worry about privacy issues. We will not be saying your name. If you want to send us a more private question, we'll read it out loud, and so your question will not be seen by the rest of the attendees.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's it. So Jen will go ahead and introduce us, and then we'll just dive right in.
Okay, so there we are. The 3 of us, as most of you know, are co-founders of Empower. Our organization is dedicated to providing education and support for those interested in embryo donation for various reasons and from all the different sides. One thing that makes us unique is that the 3 of us are not only professionally connected to embryo donation, we're also personally connected. Gina, do you want to, there we are. So I'm Jen, I'm the one in the middle. I'm there with my husband and now 8-year-old twins. I'm also the donor of 1 embryo that is now a 4-year-old boy who lives with his mother across the country from me. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I'm also the founder of embryodonationssupport.com, which is a community I built to educate and support embryo donors.
And I'm Maya, upper left-hand corner. I'm a California licensed clinical social worker, and I primarily work with fertility patients and people who are creating a family in alternative ways. And I'm also the parent of a 5-year-old who was conceived, I should say 5, almost 6-year-old, who was conceived via anonymous embryo donation.
And I'm Gina. I'm a genetic counselor in the field of reproductive medicine, and my family is the one on the right. I'm the mother of 2 kids conceived through IVF and an embryo donor. We had 16 remaining embryos after our IVF cycle, a whole lot, and we donated them in a known way to 2 different recipients, one of whom has a little girl who's now 2 years old. I apologize, it's my turn. I'm going to the next slide. So we're getting ready to launch an education platform dedicated solely to embryo donation called Moxie Education, as well as an open matching platform for donors and recipients called Moxie Matching. So if you'd like more information on that, please go to our website and sign up to stay connected, and hopefully we'll be getting that out soon.
So as Maya said, today's webinar is going to focus on all of the different relationship options donors and recipients can choose to have. As I mentioned earlier, the 3 of us will share a bit about our personal stories. Gina and I will share about our relationships that we have with our recipients, and Maya will talk about being a recipient of and I'm putting quotes around this, anonymous embryo donation. We'll talk a bit more about that later, about how we don't use that term any longer. There are really a spectrum of options ranging from completely unknown, as I said, formally called anonymous, to known, and everything in between. What we hope you take away from this webinar is that it's most important to, first of all, understand your choices. Second of all, decide what is right for you and your partner, if you have one. And then third, make sure to make space for the possible interests of all the children, whether or not they're your own children or children that are born from embryo donation. And finally, it's very important to understand that your own desires and feelings might change down the line. So it's important to consider being flexible.
So I'm going to dive into the idea of an unknown relationship. So like Jen mentioned, we really struggle with the term anonymous, and we don't like to use it because anonymity really doesn't exist anymore. You know, with consumer DNA testing and different technologies, it's just really not possible to remain anonymous. So we talk more about the concept of an unknown arrangement, but do understand that many clinics will still use the term anonymous. So what's a completely unknown arrangement? So most often, this kind of arrangement is facilitated at a fertility clinic. And what generally happens is the donors will relinquish custody or ownership of their embryos to the clinic, and then the clinic decides who receives the embryos. So some clinics have more formal programs. Other clinics just like happen to have embryos available. Sometimes, and you know, it's like, it's just really different in different clinics. So, you know, really advocate for yourself, ask questions. But sometimes if there are multiple remaining embryos, like in Gina's case, who has 16 remaining embryos, the batch is divided among multiple recipients. And other times recipients can have multiple embryos from the same batch for siblings. So again, it just depends on the situation. So ask questions and think about these things on the front end. Oftentimes, donors don't get any information about the recipients or the outcome of their embryos if it's through a program like this, while recipients will usually get some basic information about the donors, ethnicity, hair color, you know, basic health information and things like that. So it's really understanding that the expectation with this kind of arrangement is that both parties remain unknown to each other. And there's usually no legal contract between the donors and recipients, but rather there's either like a consent form or a contract that's between each party and the clinic. So, you know, we are recognizing and just really understanding that the challenge with this kind of situation is that because anonymity doesn't exist and people can often be found essentially through consumer DNA testing, what seems to be really easy on the front end may end up being like a relationally complicated on the back end if people or children do want to connect. And, you know, often people do become curious about their genetics, and then families are faced with trying to figure out like if or how or when to start trying to connect with people who may or may not want to connect. So without an agreed upon way to connect, it can get a little bit complicated. So just really being able to think about that as you're making your choices and what that might mean for you and your family. So, but you know, a lot of people, including myself, are either soon to be or already in this position and have created a family through anonymous embryo donation. Honestly, how to navigate all that could be another series of 5 webinars. And it is something I think we'll really end up talking a lot about on our podcast. And I'll talk about it more today when I end up sharing my story. But you know, as we're moving forward in this landscape, because we're at this turning point now with donor conception and the true end of anonymity, we have this opportunity to start doing things a little differently on our matching platform. So Jen will talk a little bit more about that right now.
Yeah, so what we're really talking about here is a new model for an unknown arrangement. As Maya said, we completely understand that there may be really good reasons for people to want to have unknown arrangements. Sometimes it can just be really hard to navigate your unknown feelings, or it might feel too time consuming or too overwhelming. We understand that both donors and recipients may be drawn to the idea of not getting too involved, especially in the beginning. So Gina, I want to move over to Moxie Matching. So as we've talked about a lot, we're currently developing a matching platform for embryo donors and recipients. And one of the things we're really passionate about as we're developing this is having a way for people to choose their relationship option, including an option for no initial contact, so that they can match with somebody with similar relationship interests. But a little bit different from the clinic model, we strongly believe that even in an unknown relationship, a legal contract that includes a consensual way for donors and recipients, and really most importantly, the children, to potentially connect in the future is also important. So the adults that start the process can decide whether or not they would like to know very much about each other while still leaving space for their own feelings to change and to include the potential feelings of a child. At Empower, we're always thinking about the potential future feelings of the children. So we try to work that into our model as we develop this matching platform. And then finally, of course, we believe that having a mental health professional and lawyer to help figure out some of the details and make sure everyone is on the same page about issues like future contact is really important. Gina?
Yeah. So the relationship option that Jen and I both have with our recipients is a known or open relationship. And people are often asking, like, how does this work out? You know, how do you find them? I think first is one of the questions we hear. And there's a lot of different ways to match in a known way. Sometimes it just kind of works out. Friends or family might find out that they're on opposite sides of the same issue. Somebody has embryos to donate and somebody needs embryos to build their family. So that's one way that sometimes we hear of people matching in a known way that feels really good sometimes. Other times people find each other like in surprising ways, like they go to a high school reunion and they meet up somebody that they used to know and really love, and they realize that they're on opposite sides of the same issue too. And they're like, hey, maybe this could work out. So we've heard of that. We've heard of people, I mean, meeting in such unusual ways. We've also heard of people matching through matching sites and through Facebook, social media, through agencies or matching services. That's why we're creating Moxie Matching, is that we really think that there's this area that we can really explore that's really taking into account a lot of these relationship stuff that is needed to understand before we can really match in a way that feels good for everybody, and that we're all kind of constantly kind of getting more information about this developing relationship, because we know it can be complicated. That said, when people match in known ways, the relationships can vary greatly. Some people really liken it to extended family, and they really want to build in a way for their families to meet up in person, or they might have annual or more often than that times where they get together. They might frequently text each other or email each other, send pictures, that kind of thing. Sometimes people want to just limit it to just social media. Sometimes they want to not have any social media. Like, there's very different feelings and preferences people have. That sometimes people actually really want to stay child-led and flexible. They're like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this in 5 years, but I want to leave that option open. And can I work with somebody who is just more flexible and it kind of feels on the same page? That's a really important thing to assess on the front end, and something that we're trying to gather as people do want to match within our platform, to try to help people find preferences that kind of match up better. So it all just really depends. But some tips I have for matching that I can share after thinking about embryo donation pretty much nonstop for the past several years. I don't even know how many years it is. I mean, my son was born 9 years ago, and I kind of knew we were going to be embryo donors, so I've been thinking about this a lot. But one of the things is, like, getting support. Mental health and legal support are huge to create expectations and maybe some boundaries as well. But I have some other things I think are just really important to think about. One is thinking about the other side's experience. It really can help shape a stronger relationship that can benefit both families. If you're a donor, you might find that you could benefit by watching Maya's documentary called One More Shot. And that's used to be available on Netflix. You might have already seen it, but maybe not. And it's now available on Vimeo on demand. For me, I talk to fertility patients every single day, so I'm no stranger to what the experience is like and just talking to people. But I hadn't been through the recipient side, and watching her documentary just gave me another layer. I watched it before I met her, and I was like, oh my gosh, please take my embryos. So it's interesting when you see it and all of a sudden you realize what is going on the other side. It really does shape maybe your understanding of what the relationship could be, and also just what, just kind of helping to empathize so that you can be there and be there in a way that is supportive to the other side as well. And for the donor's experience, unfortunately, I don't have a documentary that I made. Jen does not either, but we are open books. So if you have any questions, please, share them. I'd be happy to always answer. And then of course, maybe somebody in the future will create something that is great and we'll promote it. But for right now, we're just, we want to share the donor experience for recipients as well, not just for donors to hear, but for recipients to hear, because we think that the crosstalk actually helps a whole lot. My understanding of embryo donation has transformed immensely since I've met Maya. And now I really feel like the confidence level in my donation decision is just unreal. Another thing is flexibility. It's really key. Our feelings and our needs change, and so do the feelings and needs of the other side. Sometimes we feel a need for connection, and sometimes we feel a need for privacy or space. And coming from a place of empathy and understanding for your own feelings and for the feelings of the other party is really important. That said, if you're just starting the process now, you have a great opportunity to kind of forecast your own future needs, do some thinking about what your preferences are and those of your kids and what they might look like in the future. If you're really type A, like Maya here, you might want to be like a planner and just like thinking about like scenarios. What does this look like? If I'm unknown, what does that conversation look like down the line with my child? If I'm known, what does that conversation look like? Who would be involved? Those kinds of things really can make it easier for people that are planners to think about. Jen, on the other hand, is a little bit more zen, and I know that rhymes and it's so silly, but it's true about her. And she's just really flexible and relaxed, and she's kind of open to new adventures. And I think that because of that, she could shape her match that way. I'm I would say kind of in the middle, but I don't know. I mean, I can let them psychoanalyze me later since they're both counselors. In any case, I think it's just really important for that self-knowledge, knowing your own needs and desires, and figuring out the best way to honor your needs and those of your family and any family you might match with is really important. And this can be a difficult decision to make, but honoring your process and giving yourself the grace to make the best decision you can when you make it is really healing. And really, what does it mean to share embryos and be connected by genetics? This is such a new experience. This is a new way of family building. And it's a process of figuring out what it means to be connected this way, how frequently you want to be in contact, what you want the relationship to look like. It's just a process. And so we're trying to touch on those things and trying to stress the importance of thinking about your family needs long term, but also understanding we have to make decisions at a point where we don't know everything. Some things we offer to help kind of think through these issues. Jen runs support groups for donors exploring embryo donation. So if you are curious about it, we're starting a new 5-week group. 5-week group soon in a few weeks. And so if you're in that position and you wonder about matching and relationship options, I think it's a great support for people considering. And also people that are donors already, sometimes they explore their relationship there as well. We also have a private post-match Facebook group to host a space for people to talk about things that come up post-match. And this is for both donors and recipients. We think this is something people are going to have like long-term needs in trying to understand these relationships. And we just want to create a space for that. That's not really about, hey, we are thinking about this. No, we've matched and we have this relationship. How do we get through life now? And so that's one thing we also want to offer. I'm offering free genetic counseling. It's not just me. This is grant funded through this grant that we received. So we have a funded genetic counseling study so that we can offer genetic counseling to people that are considering embryo donation from the donor and recipient side so that they can get the best medical history for their children and go into the next phase of their life very confidently. So I'm going to pause here and turn it over to Jen to talk about her match.
Thank you, Gina. That was a lot of great information. So I will start by sharing a little bit about the process that I went through, how I connected with my recipient, the arrangement we agreed upon, and how it has evolved over time. So in this picture, you can see me, as well as my recipient and her son. After going through 2 rounds of IVF, I had just 1 frozen embryo left over, which is a little bit unique, because most people have more. And I've heard a lot of questions about, what does it mean to only have 1? And will a recipient be interested in just 1? For me, after about 4 years of paying for storage bills, and a lot of deep talks with my husband and my family, we decided to donate. Even though my husband and I didn't agree at first, he actually preferred to donate to science. In the end, he let me take the lead on our decision. So for me, one of the main reasons I wanted to donate is because I wanted to give back to someone who had found themselves in a similar situation to me, whether that was infertility or going through miscarriage. When I reached out to my clinic, when I was finally ready to donate, I found out that they only offered anonymous donations, which can be common. But I knew anonymous donation wasn't for me, because not only did I want to have a say in where the embryo went, I also wanted to know if there was a pregnancy and live birth. At the time of knowing I wanted to donate in a known situation, I wasn't sure what sort of relationship I would have. I just knew that I wanted a say in it. So I reached out to my clinic and I asked them, how can I donate in a known arrangement? And they wrote me back and gave me a few websites to look at. So I found a matching site online and I posted our bio, and within about 2 weeks, I was matched. I know that this is not always a common experience for everyone, but for me, it was a fairly simple, quick process. I got around 5 responses from couples and or individuals. But when I met my match, I just knew that that was it. We had created questions for our potential matches. So anybody that reached out to me sent a question. And I will just never forget the moment for the rest of my life when I was standing in my kitchen and I read the responses of my recipient, and I just knew she was the one. She's a single mom by choice, which we'll go into more later. And I just had a vision of the future. I knew it was going to work, and I knew there was going to be a child born. So
hold on, can I stop you for 1 second? This is
Yeah.
all great. And I think, it's like we're sharing our stories, not because they're right or anything like that, but just because it kind of gives an example of what this looks like. But, when you mentioned, it sounds like you had a feeling, right? So part of this process a little bit is trusting your gut.
Mm-hmm.
But you said that you had other interested people, and that's something we hear. I guess people will ask about just being hesitant, navigating these new relationships. And what if you meet somebody and then it doesn't work out? And I think Gina will talk a little bit more about this too, maybe, hopefully. But what was it like for you? What was the process like getting to know different recipients and then knowing in your heart it wasn't really a match? It probably went both ways also in some ways, but can you just talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, that part was honestly really difficult because so the process that we decided to go through was, like I said, creating a set of questions. So everybody that contacted us, I just immediately responded with the exact same email. Here are a set of questions that we have for you. And that's actually a really common question in the groups I run, is what sorts of questions to ask potential recipients. I think our questions were fairly simple and short. Other people do really complex series of questions, but it's really all about learning about the potential recipients and knowing what your deal breakers are. So for us, when I received a few of the initial responses, unfortunately, sometimes as much as my heart went out to anybody in the position that wanted, to be a part of our embryo donation, it didn't always feel right. And for me, like the way I went through it is I thought about, a genetic child of mine, and what situation, what life can I imagine them in? And one example is, and I am not saying there's anything wrong with living in Minnesota and hunting, but one of the respondents was this beautiful couple in Minnesota, and they talked about how they wanted to hunt with their child. And there were just some things that I felt like, oh, I don't know that I can picture this for a, genetic quote unquote child of mine. So in the end, I think with my recipient, what it was first of all, we had both experienced miscarriage in the past. So I felt connected with her in that way. For me also, it felt very safe because she lived across the country from me. So when we talk about the spectrum of relationships, for me, I wasn't really looking for sort of a best friend relationship that lived in the same town as me. The distance felt safe because I felt really unsure about the complexity of my feelings as I went through this. What was additionally really unique about my recipient is she lived across the country, but she also had a connection to my hometown. So when we first started talking, she said that she visits my hometown 1 to 2 times a year. So I thought, well, how cool would this be to have this like kind of safe distance, but also, maybe eventually meet her and the child. So that's what we happened on. After I chose her and we started developing our relationship, one of the things I also liked about her is that she's also very flexible. And so we both sort of just let things flow naturally. But one of the things we absolutely agreed upon is if we came up with a minimum set of expectations for communication, we would both stick to that, because for the purpose of the child being born, we both agreed that no matter how hard it can get, maybe it would be hard for me to meet him or see him, or maybe it'd be hard for her to parent in front of me. We both decided that we would at least do the minimum contact we agreed to, which ended up being 1 email a month on his birthday, and then the seeing each other 1 to 2 times a year. Of course, that was before COVID. Now there's no such thing as seeing people across the country sometimes.
I was going to ask how, you said has it changed from your initial, you're just a flexible person in general. So I don't know if it's all, I know whenever we speak to lawyers about this, they really kind of recommend just setting things up, the expectations up. But, we're talking about relationships. So like the legal contract versus a relationship, things evolve, people talk and get to know each other, and, hopefully it evolves in a really positive way. Were there any differences in when you kind of started and were saying, well, this is the expectation, or 1 email, and like how that's kind of evolved over time?
Yeah. So again, I think when I went through this, I was fairly naive. I have learned so much since then, not only from meeting the 2 of you, but also just running my groups and hearing what other people do. We at Empower highly recommend that both a donor and recipient have legal representation. When I went through it, I didn't. My recipient had an attorney, and I signed her contract. There was nothing in there about the relationship options. There was nothing in there about how much contact we would have. So I would probably do it different now, even though, it has worked out well for me. I would definitely have my own legal representation, and I would at least have some sort of baseline contact information in my contract. In terms of how the relationship has grown over time, one of my things going into this was I would have no idea how I would feel when and if there was a pregnancy, when and if there was a live birth, and when and if I met him. So luckily for me, and I highly recommend, I worked through this entire process with a counselor. So no matter what came up, I was always able to sort of navigate the complicated feelings with that counselor. And, I've written a lot about sort of meeting him for the first time and how that was for me. And it's been a real growth experience. And over time, like it's just been this beautiful thing because it feels like my recipient's child. I feel like somebody who loves and cares for him, but I don't have this sort of connection that I was fearful that I would have, that he felt like mine. So I've been really thankful to experience that over time. And then, I could also get into, how we're going to have a whole other webinar on how we talk to our children about who he is. And so I could get into that story, but I know that that's going to be another webinar entirely, is about talking with children.
Yeah, but tell the story about when your family and your children went to your recipient son's birthday party. Because I think one thing that we're working on and we're learning more about is just language. When you have really new relationships, like what do you call each other, and how, and I think part of this process of us building awareness around embryo donation and normalizing the different ways that families come together, in general, especially through embryo donation, is just like, what do people call each other? So, I know that you really took your recipient's lead on language and stuff, but you have sort of a cute story about when your twins met him or saw them at that party.
I don't know if it was cute or really embarrassing, but that's a great question, Maya, because so many people ask, what do we call each other? What do you call each other? And for me, I've always let my recipient lead on that, because I think it's important to call each other whatever she's comfortable with. So for her, she calls our children cousins, and she calls my husband and I his aunt and uncle. And it's not meant in a literal way, like it's meant as they're very close to us. So we refer to close people as cousins and aunt and uncle. So on my end, I usually just we refer to him by his name and his mother by his mother's name. We don't do as much calling of cousins and aunts and uncles, but we of course do that when we're with them. So I think it must have been his third birthday, because again, we were actually lucky enough to, before COVID, see him on birthday. I had decided to tell my then 7-year-old twins, about who he was, because they spent a lot of years just knowing like, oh, these are people that are special to us, but they didn't know about their genetic connection. So a couple days before his birthday party, I told them, about the connection, about that they were all created as embryos at the same time. It's just that, he was frozen in a drawer for, 4 additional years. So my children just handled that conversation beautifully. Like, it's amazing what children, can conceptualize. But when we went to his party, actually we got them a gift of photographs. So when his mom opened it, she went and she said, oh my gosh, and look, and here's aunt and uncle and cousin. And my son whispered something to me. And then I made the mistake of saying, what did you say? And he said it louder, and it was in front of her whole family. And he announced to the whole party that, oh no, they're not cousins, they're brothers and sisters. So that's just like one example of the complexity of how these relationships can happen. And in the end, it was fine. It was embarrassing for me at the time because all of her family was there, and my son felt like he wanted to make this announcement. But really, what I've told my children is, you can call him whatever you want, and you can develop a relationship with him in whatever way flows naturally. So that's what we will continue to do. And thank you for those questions, Maya. That helped me get through my story.
I realize it's my turn. I'm going to be sharing my screen. I'm just having a little technical thing here. Sorry. I'm driving and trying to talk, and it's kind of challenging. Okay, so I'm going to be telling my story now. And again, Jen and I are just sharing our stories as examples, and Maya will be in a moment as well. Everybody has to come to this place of like, what feels right to you. So I wanted to kind of explain my story because I've been through the matching process a few times now, and let people kind of maybe learn a few things from my experience. So when I first started considering embryo donation, the options were really quite limited from my professional view. Everybody that I knew that had an embryo donation program was really more anonymous, an unknown donation, and even like the donors didn't often find out if there was a child born, and that was like the context I found myself in. I oftentimes would talk to friends who are also colleagues and professionals in the area, and they would say like, why do you want to know? Like not in a just in a curious way, like what is it about this that makes you want to know? And I almost felt a little defensive at first, but really when it came down to it for me is I know myself really well, like we all do. And to me, I didn't want to wonder. I didn't want to always wonder, was there a baby born, multiple babies born? How many are out there? My story is never going to be complete. I'm going to always just kind of wonder. And for me, like I thought, oh my gosh, if I go to like a big place like Disneyland and I see a bunch of kids and I start seeing kids that look kind of like my kids, I'm going to be just wondering. I'm always going to be scanning the crowds like, could those be? Could those be? Could those be? And to me, I couldn't live with that into the next phase of my life. I wanted to go into the next phase of my life with confidence that I knew the story that I was leaving. For me, that's how it felt good. My husband didn't have as many feelings about that. Like he well, probably also because of what he does. He's an engineer. He's not in the medical field. He's not in the psychosocial field. He's not helping people build families every day, and so he's not thinking about these things quite in the same way. So he really let me lead on the decision and on to donate, and then also on the decision about how to donate. He, said, he's like, more than me. Like, let's do it the way you think might be right for us. So I went out with some specific things I was looking for in recipients. I was really just kind of thinking about what would be important to us in terms of establishing a relationship long term. Like Jen, I really thought through like, what do those lives look like, and how would I fit in how would I fit in terms of like, how do I explain what this decision was to them? And like, I just wanted to feel good about it. I wanted to feel like I did my due diligence and I was responsible to these potential children. So when I went out I knew it was going to be quite a project because we had quite a few embryos. So I knew it was going to be quite a project. I waited until my daughter, my youngest, was about 3 years old. And that was because I was just like, I didn't want to make the decision when she was a newborn or really young, even though I felt it immediately. Like I felt like, okay, I think 2 kids is what we want. But I mean, after I had my first child and realized how hard one was, then eventually had 2 kids and realized how hard 2 was. And I was like, this is it for me. I know that I'm done. But I really wanted to come out of early infancy, just really confident that this was what I wanted to do. I didn't want to make a decision too early. I also wanted to do it when it was more manageable. I felt like I could handle all that extra responsibility of thinking through family relationships and, just kind of all that stuff. It's just a little complicated. So I waited a little while. And then when we started reaching out, we found a couple that I just loved through Facebook originally. And I started going through the medical clearance phase of it. And I thought it was actually going to be pretty quick because I'm in the medical field. Like a lot of the stuff that I just have access to, most people don't have access to as easily. So I thought it was going to be pretty quick. Turns out it was took a little bit longer than the recipients had time for, or, I think that ultimately it came down to, they had some medical issues. They had to go more quickly. And so they ended up going a different direction for their family building. And we still are in contact. They're still lovely. And I still kind of like have that like fantasy of like, oh, they have been my recipients. But they have their own family now, and it's lovely. But through that process, I started collecting more medical information from my family because, again, I'm a genetic counselor in fertility. This is what I do every day. I'm going to give the very best family history I can to these potential children. So I started contacting our very large extended family and saying, is there any new medical information I can share with our embryo donation recipients? And I got an interesting email back from my uncle who gave me some information about his history, but also asked if we had extra embryos to donate. He and his wife had been thinking about embryo donation, and they were a new married couple. They both had children from previous relationships, so they were a blended family, but they were thinking about having their own baby. And we got together, my husband and I started talking about it and was like, this might really work. This might really feel good. So we got together for a family dinner just to kind of explore it and talk and get to know each other a little bit better. I got to know his wife a little better. And I always really liked her from the moment I met her, but I didn't know what our relationship could look like. So I was just kind of going in with, open eyes of like what this could be. And I know she did too. She mustered up the courage at our family dinner to ask me a question that I'm sure was really hard for her, which is, if I have a baby, are you going to want my baby back? Are you going to want my baby? Are you going to feel like this is your baby? And I got to really confidently say, no, I'm going to love your baby. Honestly, I'm going to love your baby. I know that. Not only is she going to be my cousin, but I'm going, or not she, at this point, I'm giving a sneak peek. It becomes a she. Anyway, I got to, and I just realized I keep sharing the picture, so I should stop the share real quick. So anyway, I got to say, I will love your baby, but I know this is the right decision for us, for our family. I know this is the right decision for this baby. And so for me, no, I really feel good about this decision. I don't feel like that will happen. And I also got to tell her, and also I will have no legal recourse, you understand. And so getting to that perspective, I think it put her at ease. The other thing for me that put me at ease was thinking about the fact that they're a blended family. For me, that was a really good first donation to get into, because she had already been a mom. He had already been a dad. I knew what they were like as parents in some way. And also they knew what it was like to have other people loving their children. And so I don't think they were as threatened by the fact that we could be somewhat involved and be part of their extended family. So then over time, they got into their cycle. We texted quite a bit, but our relationship really blossomed once they had their daughter. So they had a little girl. And, we got to just our relationship started to develop because we got to share more about our philosophy on life, our parenting styles, everything aligned really nicely. And I just felt like it started to become a gift. Every time I opened up a new text from their family, I was like, oh my gosh, like it's something exciting. And so sometimes I even wait. If I'm in the middle of something, I'm like, I'm going to wait to open that because I want to, give it the time. I kind of think of her, the recipient mom, as my sister mom. Number one, she feels like a sister. She feels like a sister I didn't previously have, but also she's a mom of a child that is so similar to my own kids that like, I feel like we're sharing this unique experience of like, it's just so cool to raise these children that have such similarities. And like, she can really like, for whatever context those things are genetic, there are some things that are just super cool to reflect on. And of course, we're figuring out the language of what we call each other. Right now, our kids call their daughter their sister cousin. And of course, for us, it's technically correct. Genetically, sister. Relationally, cousin, for first cousin once removed, but whatever. But it fits, but it also just feels good to us. The recipients call us, my husband and I, her godparents, which they gave us that really special title. And it just makes it's a beautiful thing. But they call us by our first names. We call them by auntie and uncle, just because he was already my uncle, so it's really normal for me to call him uncle. And we're just really open about our relationship with our kids. They understand. It's interesting. Our kids understand genetics and biology in ways that I think are way beyond their years. And they understand diversity and family structures in really cool ways that, like, I think is setting them up for a really good view of the world. And she's just part of our lives. That we talk about their daughter all the time. We save clothes and toys for her that my daughter's outgrown, and it's just we put it in her basket, and it's like this whole thing, like, oh, I'm too big for these now. They're going to, I don't want to say her name here, but we always have, this is just part of our daily lives. My son, he's kind of going through the what ifs right now. And so sometimes he just ponders out loud, like, what would have happened if you had kept all the embryos? And we've talked about what our lives might look like, how it might be different, and just pondering it with him. And I love that. I love that he has the space to think about it. And it's just in a way that we can just talk about why we make the decisions we make. And everybody has to make decisions they make in the best way that they can. And I think he's totally cool with it. I just think he's, questioning. My daughter, on the other hand, I think she's like really secretly wants a sister, and so there's this part of me that sometimes feels a little bit like, oh, yeah, I wish I could give you that for you, but for me, I know that I'm at my limit. I know she asked to go to her house all the time. She the recipients, they have two older daughters in the house as well. So she has older sisters in the house with her. They get to play with her, and she sees both the younger sister part and the older sister part. And I think she just wants a sister, but she also wants every single Hatchimal on the market and every single Barbie on the market. And she wants to do all the jobs in the world, and she wants a lot of things. And she's almost 6, and her view of the world is so massive, and I just love it. And I also know that, we find our way to live in our lives. So I think we're probably going to face, like, maybe this is just going to feel like a favorite cousin that lives in a different home, just like my favorite cousin lived in a different home, and she's still one of my very good friends, my very best friends. So I think that we're just open to that.
Stop you for just a second. I'm noticing time, just because we're, obviously we have so much to talk about with all of this, but when we're highlighting just relationship options, right? So one option Jen's kind of talked about, it's a known donation, but there's space, and they have met several times. What you're really describing is this idea of extended family, which some people do want to have on both ends. And I want to just stress that when these matches or these choices of relationships are happening, it's for both people. And I think from the recipient perspective, sometimes it feels like, oh, it's like being chosen, or do I have to do what they want to do, or something like that. And I think what you're really describing is both sides are really open to this kind of arrangement, and you've allowed it to kind of expand over time and things like that. I want to shift you, because obviously I know your story well, and I know that you've matched multiple times and in different ways. And so I just, I think it'd be great for you to just touch upon briefly what it was like to then match with second recipients, through social people you don't know in the same way, because you're kind of navigating both of these different things. Is that okay if I go to that?
Oh, yes, and I will try to be brief. Okay, so it's really hard to replicate this experience, and I tried by giving you my embryos, but you did not take them. So therefore,
I would love one of your embryos.
I know. I'm just kidding.
I'd be yeah.
We have a lot going on, but I wanted to be welcoming to our little unit, to any other recipients in the future, but I also, getting to know the recipient side more, more clearly, it helped me to realize that, like, I needed to make space. I need to allow them to have their space for whatever that journey might look like for them. And so and also just with my newest match, we met through Facebook again. And I really wanted to give them the space to do this. Also, with pandemic parenting and just working mom stuff, I just don't have as much time to socialize. So there's part of me that's just like, okay, I'm doing as much as I physically can right now. But I also did all the hard emotional work in my first donation. I'm cool. I feel really confident. This is not my first rodeo, and I feel ready to embrace their journey, whatever that might be. And there's lots more to explore as we go on into the future. But I just feel good now. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I think it does. And maybe I don't know if there's anything else specific you're thinking about in terms of relationship and the relationships that you have, but sometimes, like, I don't know, do you have like tips, like 3 tips that you would, for somebody who has multiple embryos and has to navigate multiple relationships? Is this something that is, would people do this at the same time? We actually haven't even really talked about that. This idea of like having multiple recipients at the same time. Yours kind of went one after the other. It was your uncle, and then you kind of processed through that. I know also that you had a match that kind of fell through, for lack of a better word, during the legal contract phase and things like that. And I think we're just trying to normalize the things that could happen, and the different relationships that happen. And really support people in setting themselves up the best that they can on the front end.
Yeah. So for me, I think knowing I have matched multiple times. I've explored matches that never got to the point even where we were really talking about legal or anything like that as well. But ultimately, it comes down to knowing your deal breakers on the front end. Having those hard conversations, if they're hard, you have to have them. It may be hard. It may be hard to talk about this stuff, but you kind of need to have it so that you can feel like you've been heard and they've been heard. And also it just helps you find those places where you don't jive. Getting professional support. I am a professional in this area, and I thought, oh, I've got this and I know how to talk about this stuff. And yet when I got into one of my matches, as you mentioned, when we got to the legal phase, we had already talked a lot about this stuff. And when it came down to putting it on paper, we didn't agree. We didn't have the same ideas. And it's just like, sometimes it's better to, even if it sucks to like stop there, it's better to stop there than to have some awkward relationship where you're, walking on eggshells around each other. And so I feel like sometimes you just only realize that stuff when you're working with a professional. So I think even though I actually, legal can go different ways. My second way, we both were represented. It was beautiful. My second donation that's actually going through, it was, beautiful, conversation between our lawyers. It was super easy. Sometimes it's not so easy. Sometimes the lawyers have to go back and forth, and sometimes you have to go back and forth while you're talking it out. And that's okay. That is part of the process. But part of the deal is opening yourself up to somebody else's journey. I was going to say, for me, doing it all at the same time felt too much. I felt like I was balancing too many things in my head. I couldn't do it. So I was really happy when it ended up being one after the other. But I also kind of would prefer, it would be nice if all the kids were kind of the same age and that we had a bigger kind of family group where we felt like we were supporting each other at the same places. I feel like there's the pros and cons to both approaches. And of course our stories are still going. So who knows how I'm going to feel in, 10 years. But this decision for me was really like a sliding doors moment. If I'd gone a different direction or didn't go known, I think I would just have a different life. And I feel like for me, it just opened up this area of adventure and opportunity and exploring family concepts and all this stuff that has been really enriching for my life.
Yeah, it's always amazing to hear you guys talk about all this. I'm very time conscious. I'm going to try not to rush, but also we are going to get to questions. We might be just a drop later. There's this glorious picture of me that Gina insists on using. So I'm going to share my story. Jen and Gina obviously both shared being in known situations, but within the known, being on kind of different ends of this known spectrum. My situation is really different, and I never made any embryos. So sometimes just when I hear you guys talk, I like can't even imagine what it might be like to have embryos to donate. So I was in a very, very different position. I was a fertility patient for the better part of like 2011 to 2014. And by the time I got to embryo donation, I really did feel pretty broken. Yeah. And I think if I'm being honest, I really felt like out of options. And so, I just briefly had done IUIs, IVF, my sister donated eggs to us. We did several transfers from that weren't successful. We were researching adoption. It just felt really overwhelming and a lot. And so when I landed on a clinic who had available embryos, actually available, I'll say anonymous and quote embryos, it actually did really feel appealing to me. It was really easy, and I was ready for something to be easy and for something to work. And looking back, I also probably needed a little bit of space initially to see. I'd never been pregnant. I didn't know if I could get pregnant. And I think, part of what can be a little complicated about relationships is just that feeling of, okay, what if I can't get pregnant? And, I needed space to know that I could get pregnant, to feel confident in that pregnancy. And I think more so to feel confident in my identity as a mom of a child who's not genetically my own. Before I could have relationships with anyone genetically related to my child. So, when Gina talks about like these big family things, now that sounds amazing to me. But if I really put myself back, in 2014, that probably would have freaked me out in some ways. Like, oh my God, I have to I've had so many people in my journey already. Like, am I seriously going to have all these other people? But now I have a very, very different perspective. And would be a lot more open to that. And I also made some assumptions that if I wanted to connect with our donors later, that the clinic would help us. And that wasn't the case. And so again, I think we're really talking about advocating for yourself on the front end, asking questions, thinking about what you might need, and then how you can best navigate that and just understand the implications of the choices. In my heart at the time, I knew that it would be best for my potential child to have access to genetic roots and relatives. And I just kind of assumed that it would work out. And, even though now I don't have the access to her genetic connections that I wish I did, we are working it out. Again, I don't want to freak people out, right? Because, we're all kind of doing the best that we can. And I'm realizing that just a lot of my own feelings and fears and issues right now are really my own. My daughter knows the truth of how we became a family and how she was conceived, and she'll continue to know the truth throughout her life. And even if there are some missing pieces, the information that I don't currently have doesn't change our relationship. She knows that I'm her mom and that she's so loved, and she knows she has a unique origin story. And I can only do my best right now in allowing her the space to ask questions, to join her in her curiosity. And, it's like, we don't have this conversation daily, but it is a part of her that we're all really proud of. And it's been really fun. And when we do the podcast and we do another webinar just about kids, I think we'll end up sharing just how our kids are integrating this into their sense of self. And there's interesting things through play, that we'll really noticing that our kids, they get it, they understand it, and it's just part of who they are. She's, like I said, she's 5 going on 15, but what's really most important for us at this stage is to be really honest. And honest about how our family came together, honest about conception. It is important to start these conversations early. Sometimes we get asked, like, when do you start telling? And start from the very beginning, start from infancy. It just becomes a seamless part of who a child is, and how everybody came together as a family. And she knows that she had donor helpers. That's a term that I landed on. Again, when we're talking about language, we're really trying to figure out what makes sense for your own family, what feels comfortable. And for us, it was donor helpers. And she understands that in the way that a 5-year-old can. And we made like a photo book early on that showed an egg and a sperm, and we just had a lot of other books on different families come together in different ways and things like that. So I've been normalizing that from the get-go. Now we have a really cute book. I should get the name of it. I think it's called What Makes a Baby or something like that. It's very like neutral. It's about sperm and egg. So my kid can tell you what sperm is, at 5, which I don't know if that's something I'm really proud of or something else. But over time, it's like I just started to really realize that much of my anxiety comes from not knowing what she may want when she's a teenager, or not having the information she may need if she becomes very curious about her genetic siblings or genetic relatives. And I've learned that there are probably a good amount of genetic half siblings out there, because she was created with the help of an egg donor as well. So, they're just kind of, they're pieces to this that I'm going through and navigating and figuring out. And I remind myself that rather than being anxious about it, I need to just embrace the journey and be there to support her with whatever she might need. But that kind of leads us back full circle in a way to why we're doing the work that we're doing. A big piece of this is, the donor conceived person's perspective and needs, and how to integrate that into the family building choices for adults and for parents. Because if we had a consensual way to connect with her donors, it would just save me so much time and brain space, and provide something that I think is really important for my child, which is access. And so, yeah, again, that's like a real drive to our matching platform. We're really trying to keep in mind all the different options that people might want, including what parents might want in the future, what a child might need. And we're front loading the education so that, again, this is not about, what the 3 of us did. This is really about people getting the education and the tools, the ways to think about this in different, asking different questions, so that you can make informed decisions for yourself and your future family, essentially. It's 11. I guess I'll just keep going with recipient perspective, and maybe we'll just shift then, and we'll save all the stuff about kids for another time. But so in terms of the recipient perspective, Gina, you guys were able to kind of weave in nicely just some tips for donors. In terms of recipients, here's just a couple things on this slide. Everyone is really different, and people who move to embryo donation as a family building choice do so for different reasons, and they have different feelings about it. As a therapist in this field, I have seen a variety of different ways people approach becoming a recipient of a donated embryo. Some people are super excited about it. They want to match. They would have been a great match for Gina, and they want that, extended family and to be closely connected. Some people come to embryo donation after a lot of loss. and just maybe a process where they've had like a lot of cooks in the kitchen essentially, and they might need some space to heal from whatever they've been through. They just might prefer not to have anyone else involved in their journey. And this could be kind of on both sides too, but specifically for the recipient, it's really this idea of taking the time to process your journey. You want to move into parenting with a certain level of confidence. I think we're also trying to acknowledge and normalize that feelings change over time, and to really, really emphasize thinking about what your potential child or children might need. And and you might not know, and you might be fine with certain things. And it's just knowing that if something comes up, or if your child wants to know certain things, how would we approach it? How would we talk about it? Processing this with a mental health professional would be probably really helpful in different ways. And if this is of interest, this idea of talking, about anonymous or unknown recipient perspective is of interest to people out there, let us know, and maybe I can do some kind of other group or or something like that. But part of this is we're learning from you all what the needs are in this landscape. So anyway, maybe we should wrap it.
Do you want to wrap it up and move past the next slide? It sounds like so.
I think so.
Yeah, we'll come back. We have a lot to talk about with children, so I think you've touched on the main points that we wanted to get across today. Jen, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this can be really quick. Basically, as you've heard, we're very passionate about educating and supporting people on all sides, as well as potential children born. So if you're interested in our education platform, which we will be launching hopefully very soon, just shoot us an email or sign up on our website. We will get more information to you about that. And we do have articles we've written specifically to this concept of relationship building and options, as well as talking to children. So
I'll just throw out there too, just some resources that are really good about, ways to talk to children about third-party conception and donor conception and embryo donation. VARTA, VARTA is a great site and source. The Donor Conception Network, Resolve sometimes has different resources. So if you have any specific things, again, email us. We want to help people however we can. That's our mission. So if you just have some specific things, just don't hesitate to reach out and email us. I do see that there's some questions. We had some emailed questions as well. So maybe I'll start with the email one. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I have to bring it up. Okay, so this is from someone who has a child through my situation, through an anonymous embryo donor after years of failed fertility treatments. So she says, we have pictures of the egg donor, but no names, of course. And I find I'm conflicted on what age I should show the photos to my child, since we have no other info except the medical info provided. Any thoughts? So again, I think, it's sort of like, when do we start doing this? And the kind of rule of thumb, I guess you could say, is early and often. Often is, to be figured out for yourself. We do talk about it in my family, kind of often, but, it's not every day. It's not even every week. But, starting early, knowing that it's an evolving conversation. It's not like you're going to tell this kid one time and everybody's going to be kind of moving past it, but it's just, starting to find the language that you're comfortable with, and starting, when your child's a baby, again, sharing from a place of confidence. You can make a little book. And so the idea of a photo, that I think is very personal also. I don't know if Jen and Gina, you agree or disagree, but you can make a book that has the photo of the donor in there, and that's somebody who helped your family come to be, and it's always there, and that's just kind of part of the story. If that doesn't feel right, you could tell the child, or in a book form or something like that, about having donor helpers, or however you want to kind of identify them. And then as the child gets older, you can offer it and see, or if it comes up naturally. And that actually came up for us not too long ago, just at 5, because she's known this, and we did this like family tree project. The roots were the donor helpers. And so, she said, what do they look like? Right. And so, I have what I have, and that's it. So I hope that answers. If there is more follow-up to that, email me or us, and we'll get to that. I can actually see the chat, Gina. Everybody's so impressed when I can do anything remotely technical. But hi, Jen Noonan. I know you. So there's some, oh, there's
well, we're not supposed to say names, but those are professionals. So yeah.
I'm not going to say names.
Some professionals are here. So I noticed there was one question. One question I saw was, if I donate my embryos, will I ever know if the transfer was successful? That's really just dependent on how you set it up. If it's through a clinic that's in an unknown way, you might not, and that might be the terms you sign up for. If you do a known donation, you can establish on the front end what you want to know, what they want to share, and those things can be specifically laid out in legal contracts if you want to know the outcome but don't want any other information. Other times you kind of do set some relationship thoughts into the legal contracts. Though we also do clarify that, legal contracts, it's not so much for enforceability for relationships. That part is not the point of the contract. The relationship exploration is more about getting it all out there, getting professional help, and just like saying, this is what we want, and this is, how we want it. There are some parts of it that are super, super enforceable. And of course, I'm not a lawyer, so talk to your lawyer, but there are parts that are really important for like the recipient parents to have like relinquishment of parental responsibilities there outlined in the contract. So to clarify, it's just, it just depends on how you set up your donation.
And I actually didn't know this part, like from the clinic that we went through, is that I learned later that the donors were not allowed to know if a pregnancy occurred or any other information. So I don't know if, maybe things have changed over time or something like that, but it's definitely, if you're planning to go through a clinic in this way, ask what you're allowed to know and that kind of stuff, if that's something that's important to you. Next question. Should I read this one? Are embryo donation conceived people participating in your organization? We really hope so. We had a blog. One of our first blogs was, Jen, maybe you could be better in talking about this, but we had two moms, a donor and recipient, who found each other after 15 years. And then the donor conceived child who was a 15, 16-year-old, right?
16.
Yeah. And then and the children of the donors, they wrote. So yeah, if you check out our blog on our website, we definitely are wanting to have donor conceived perspectives and donor conceived people participating in whatever way we can. And if you are an embryo donation conceived person, please reach out to us, because we would love to, hear your voice and feature you in some way. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we do with our previous webinar, we talked about our Art of Infertility project, where we're trying to get different perspectives. And that's one voice that is really quite missing, is probably just because of the age of a lot of the people that are embryo donor conceived, is that we don't have a lot of people that are adults that are telling their stories, but we do want to hear how this can impact a child and what that life looks like, and how parents might set it up and talk about it in ways that are really, really helpful to a child. So that's definitely an aim of our organization. We don't have somebody right now on like our advisory board, but that's something we hope to happen in the future. So if you know somebody, if somebody's interested, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Am I reading these now?
I don't know. I was just
look at this technology, and I should like get all close. Is matching only for the USA? People can match in all kinds of ways. I don't know if this question is specifically for matching with us. We are focused on the States, and but people can match with anybody. It's just figuring out what the legalities are in different countries, and we're not personally really equipped to navigate that. But if you find people through social media and you work with a clinic, and each person has a lawyer in their place of origin, then your embryos are your embryos. So doing what you want with them, I believe, is fine. I think it's just figuring out, what are the legalities between different places and things like that. So with us, our site is specific for America for now. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's true. Because of legal things, we have to be careful, like just knowing the landscape. Yeah. The next question, I was kind of giving it to you because I was wondering if we were going to skip around, but we don't know the name. Somebody asked, what is the name of your podcast?
We know. I think we know.
We're working on knowing.
Do we know? Okay.
What we've landed on is never thought we'd be here. And that's because we never thought we'd be here in different ways. And I think, maybe the second tagline to it could be, but we're really glad we are, because even though a lot of this journey, especially mine, I mean, I guess yours too, I shouldn't say especially mine, but it's hard. There are a lot of hard parts of it. But we never thought we'd be here, and it's been such a life-changing experience for all of us. And I wouldn't have my family if it weren't for embryo donation, and so I think that's what we've landed on now. Now we just have to figure out all the tech between how do you start a pot. We got the equipment, so but stay tuned. We're hoping to start within next month. Ooh, I just said it. So.
Oh, and the next question was, will your matching site be for profit?
Will our matching site be for profit? So, right now, because we have this grant from the HHS department, we're really able to provide a lot of things for free, including, and I see the next question is also about Jen's support groups. The support groups are free. Space is limited. So if you have people who want to sign up, yes, they're open to anyone. How many participants do you have, Jen? 6?
So
8?
yeah, I limit it to 6 participants. Again, yes, it's free. At this point, I'm just running support groups for donors. Either you have already donated or you're considering donation, but we've also talked a lot about in the future running support groups for recipients. So at this point, for the group that's starting in the next couple of weeks, it is just for donors. And if you're interested, you can either sign up on our website under Stay Connected or just shoot us an email.
Yeah, but to go back to the cost for the matching site, there will be an upfront small fee for recipients. That's really because we have to figure out a way to sustain past the grant. I don't even know if that will totally do it, but yeah, it's a really reasonable fee in comparison to, or just whatever else is out there. And if there are people, well, sorry, what do you say, Jen?
I was just going to say it's free for donors, of course.
Oh, yeah, always free for donors, small cost to recipients. If there's anybody who, really needs to talk about that, email us. Interested in hearing what kinds of questions Jen asked her potential recipients before that first message. And I wonder if you have that document somewhere. I wonder if we can.
I do. Yeah, I do. I have it because it's something that comes up a lot in my groups. So if, will you please, the person that wrote that question, just send an email to us. It's hello@empowerdonation.com, because I can give you exactly what I asked. And I also have compiled a list of questions that other people that I know have asked. So I have those resources for you. So just send an email. And instead of going into it right now, I'd love to just shoot you back all the questions. And that's for anybody else listening that wants.
And honestly, we might put that on Moxie Ed, we make something like that. But I think that the general things you want to know is you want to figure out what is important to you, right? And what are you comfortable with? For some people, all they want to know is that it's somebody who has a loving home or something like that. And for other people, they really want to know, if there are other children, if they have pets, what kind of parenting style they might have. It might be kind of down to the, deep and dirty or whatever people say. So I think it is different for everyone. But yeah, we're happy to share. Look, and I'm happy to share Jen's list of things. A question about donating internationally. I think we covered that yes, we believe so, not through us specifically, but it's really figuring out wherever you are, it's consulting with a family formation lawyer or somebody who works in AR, assisted reproductive technologies, on the legal side, to really understand what the legalities are about that with different countries. Jen, next one.
Yeah, so the next one is for me, and it says, what was the process like of transferring the embryo out of your clinic? I actually didn't end up doing that. So even though I matched with a recipient across the country, she ended up coming to my clinic for transfer. It was, again, she had the connection to my hometown, and it was just a little bit of an easier way of going about it. However, I know a lot of people do ship embryos, and that's something, again, that takes, like, if you're going through the process, it often takes like professionals to help, legal professionals, and whatnot, as well as clinics. So
And I actually did that. So
oh,
I think I'll jump in. Yeah. So my embryos were sent to a long-term storage facility before we ended up donating them. So we had them, they were transferred out of the clinic we originally created them at, to this long-term storage facility. Then they came back from the long-term storage facility to a different clinic entirely, and then the second batch has been shipped from that storage facility to another clinic. So it can be done. It can be a little complicated because clinics have different requirements for what they want to see. They might have different perspectives on what the quality of the embryos are, if they're willing to take them and transfer them. There's a lot of things that can be a little tricky there. That is, it does feel a little bit complicated, just logistically managing all that piece, but it can be done. And most of the time, if they're suitable embryos to be transferred, and people are informed properly, and they've gone through all the good steps to get to the point where they're making informed decisions, doctors will often help with that. But it can be a little bit of a logistical trick. It's a little bit hard to do it. For some people, it's a little bit like more logistically challenging, and we can kind of sometimes lend our experience, or put you in touch with people that can help as well.
Yeah. And sometimes it's really simple, right?
And sometimes it's really simple. Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Sort of clinic dependent and situation dependent and stuff like that. So it's really hard for us to like generalize a lot of this stuff.
But there was a second part of that question too. Did you see it?
No,
so it says, I assume Maya and Jen are the mental health professionals who will complete the embryo donation consultation with the recipients and the evaluation for the donors, or will this even be required? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, so we definitely, here's the thing that's really hard. We personally can't really require anybody to do anything, right? I mean, we have what we call the Empower method that has steps. This is all going to be on our education site, but also just in terms of the process. Yes, we're mental health professionals, but we will refer people to licensed professionals in their state to help support the process for people. So we won't be doing the consultations and things like that ourselves, unless it's, for me, I'm in California, and it's, again, it just makes sense. It just makes sense to, what we recommend is that each party, the donor and then the recipient, see their own, have their own consultation with a therapist, specifically in the field of reproductive medicine, to really go through, what are my deal breakers? What are my expectations? What am I okay with? What am I not okay with? What do I need to process? What do I need to ask, those kinds of things. And then often a joint session is really helpful, where everybody comes together and really talks about these different things and feelings and fears and fantasies and everything like that. Clinics will often require this. So that's where the requirement comes from. If the clinic doesn't require, we really recommend people do it anyway. And we will help to provide referrals to different professionals in different states that can help support that.
I'm going to just interject here, because if people are hopping off, I haven't really looked at the numbers, but if people are like not staying for the whole question, I wanted to also just mention that we'll be sending out a survey. So we have a few more questions. We're going to go through them, and we'll stay on as long as you want to stay. But at the same time, if you're jumping off, I want you to know there's a survey. We'd really love your feedback. And so be sure to check that email, and maybe it shouldn't take any longer than 5 minutes. We'd really appreciate your feedback.
So these are some questions for you, G.
Yeah. So did or does your uncle and his wife live near you? If so, how often do you see their daughter? Yeah, they live about 3.5 hours away. And so they live where a lot of my dad's side of the family lives. And so we sometimes we go there a couple times a year. They come here a couple times a year. Until COVID, we were actually making it a priority because we liked it so much. We found ourselves surprised by how much we really wanted to see each other. Or maybe I say that, I don't know if they were surprised, but I just felt like maybe at the beginning nobody was really sure what this was going to look like, and then over time we just like let's make it a priority, and our kids like it too. So I would say a couple times a year, or I would say probably like 3 to 4, and then since COVID we've seen them one time at a social distancing gathering, and so it's kind of hard. The next question was for me as well. Curious, when you match with a couple, how many embryos do you offer the couple? Or individual? I mean, I've also considered donating to individuals. We had it depends. It depends on how many they want. So for me, we split the batch in two. When we eventually we landed on, we split the batch in two, so 8 and 8. But it really depended on the quality. I had to like really go through it and go like, okay, I want to make sure they get equal quality, because some of them are like blastocyst, beautiful, and then some of them are like, that one doesn't have as much of a chance. We froze on day 3 and like long. There's some issues there that I wanted to give them, everybody a really good chance to have a baby or more than one baby. But I also just asked them, like, what do you want? My first recipient that ended up not working with us in the long run, she actually only wanted 4 most. And so it just really depends on like what people are feeling like they want to use. And sometimes they feel like they want to, if they know it's a bigger batch, they want the other children to have a chance to be born soon so they can all have a relationship. So it's kind of complicated in the sense that just trying to build the family, extended family or extended group of people that you feel really comfortable with. And I think nobody really knows when they go in. It's like you kind of only know like how many children you might want, but how many other people want is really hard to guess. I'm going to move to the next question. Or maybe this is the question. This was a resource somebody gave the book title, "What Makes a Baby," that Maya had mentioned. Yeah, a book for every kind of family and every kind of kid.
Yeah, and thank you for that, by Corey Silverberg. And it is a favorite of many. A lot of books, I always made my own books just because, I found it easiest and most sort of applicable to our situation. I like that. And there were pictures of my kids, so that, kids always like that. But this book I do really like, especially now that she's 5, and it helps us make sense of things. It's Not the Stork is another series of another book that it's kind of like sex ed for kids, starting around age 4 or 5. I think there's a couple different there's a second version of it too, but
yeah, that's actually what I use to talk with my children. And it's not about embryo donation specifically, but it definitely sets the base of their understanding that babies are made in all sorts of different ways. And it's a 3-part, starts with It's Not the Stork. And then I think the next one is called It's So Amazing. And I can't remember the one after that, but that was a very useful tool for me in talking with my children.
Yeah, I think sometimes, when the children's books are a little more vague or about like food, cupcakes or something else, it doesn't always connect. And for me personally, I just was going to go straight for it. Egg and sperm. This is what's happening, And so she's known what sperm is and eggs are, and how it all comes together for a long time. A kind of extension of that would be deeply curious to hear a kid perspective. Yeah, I think that perspective needs to be centered in donor and recipient thinking about the known unknown or unknown known spectrum choices. Absolutely. And that, I think we're going to move that webinar to be the next one, to really talk about how kids, we'll give, again, because we're personally and professionally connected, we will kind of talk about things in a general way, and then just share some things about how we're talking about it, how our children, we have children of different ages right now, no teenagers, but thank God.
I know, right?
Let's see, Jen mentioned she explored places for matching. Are there websites you recommend for matching to get started? It's kind of a hard one.
So for me, I mentioned that my clinic supplied me with some resources. I ended up using Miracles Waiting, which, it fit, my needs at the time. Again, and as this person that asked this question mentioned, we're working on our own matching site. But if you're really wanting to get started today, you can always, do a search. There are matching sites out there. There's also Facebook, as Gina mentioned. That's how she matched. So yeah, again, for me, I used Miracles Waiting, and it was fine.
And I think people have specific, I think with, different matching platforms might kind of be specific for different people's needs in some ways. So again, if you have any specific question, just send us an email. We'll do our best to give you any resources that we can think of. Our matching platform, we're now sort of in the software development business, which is, not our strength, but we're hoping that gets up, within the next month or so. So hopefully that'll be a resource as well. But yeah, if you want some specifics or let us know some specific things about what you're looking for in terms of matching and how you want to match and stuff like that, we might be able to give some more options. Oh, thank you for loving our podcast name.
I know, that was sweet.
We love it. We're hoping, we just have to, figure out the logistics, as everybody always does. Okay, so somebody's writing, thanks for a super, I skipped a couple other things there, but it didn't look like questions, if that's okay. But you guys,
I think the last one is a question. Can you talk a bit about fears on both sides as a donor? What it will feel like to meet and see your donor child in the world, i.e. will they feel like mine? And on the recipient side, will my child bond more with the genetic donor? What other fears have come up in your work and how to navigate those fears?
That's such a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this question could be an entire, not only an entire webinar, an entire 6-week group series. And I'm not sure if the person that asked it is a potential donor, but this is something we talk about a lot in my support groups. We really talk a lot about normalizing fears and that they're okay. I've also done a lot of writing in the past about my own fears with meeting my recipient's son. So gosh, I'm not sure if I could encapsulate that right now, other than to say, whatever fear you have is normal. And it's also normal to not have fears. So if you're just going through this process as a donor and you feel a lot of joy, that's okay too. And that's a lot of what we talk about is, no matter what you're feeling, give yourself grace and let yourself feel, reach out, talk with people about it that may understand. And, I think that this is a theme that we will continue to talk about as an organization. And I don't know if it will be another webinar or, if it's just something that we'll focus on in groups, but thank you for the question. I don't know, Maya, you have something from the recipient side.
Yeah, I mean, I think I heard both of you say, and I know this, but neither of you feel that your recipient's child, Jen, yours is a boy at 4, and Gina, a little girl, maybe 2, right? I don't ever hear you thinking about or conceptualizing these children as anything but somebody else's child that you participated in helping come to be.
Absolutely.
I mean, I have so much joy watching her grow up. I have so much joy in watching the joy that their family has. It's beautiful, but I feel like an aunt or a grandma or somebody just a little bit removed. This is so beautiful and I'm part of it, but it's definitely not the same thing as what I feel with my children.
Yeah. I think from the recipient side, because I am very confident that my child is my child, and I don't feel threatened by anybody that would be genetically related to her. I really embrace the idea of other people connecting to her and caring about her, as a recipient. However, in the beginning, I don't know if I would have felt the same. It's not that I was protective or it's really hard because I just wasn't in that position, right? But it could be very hard when, I could imagine going through a pregnancy or something like that. And I had a really hard pregnancy that or having a loss or something, that there'd be a fear for me of having to tell the donor that the transfer didn't work, or that, my body didn't hold, it's there's so many things, right? But I think it's this idea of if we can really approach our fears and understand where they're coming from and be honest about them and acknowledge them and then move through them with this other person that you're connecting with. I think we could have done, I think it would have been a good recipient maybe for one of you, like I think that could have worked. But, at the time, I think there are just a lot of fears because we're all scared of what we don't know. But I think if we change the lens slightly and rather than having fears around it, we just embrace, okay, we don't know this, but we're going to just do the best we can. And this is how I'm honestly feeling. But, how can I work through that? How can I navigate that? Right. And I think it's just being really open and honest, having mental health support, a therapist that you like and can connect with, having friends that get it, having a community. That's why we're, building the Facebook page and stuff like that or the Facebook page exists. How do people get to that? If they wanted to.
Group. She does not know anything about Facebook. So it's called the Facebook group.
I've never been on the Facebook.
So you just search, right? I think it's just after the match.
Yep. So it's a group specifically for people that have already matched, which there's a lot of other groups for people considering matching. But yeah, it's called After the Match. Just search that or embryo donation.
And that could be a really good place to build a community a little bit, to talk about those fears and to talk about those things. But I don't personally, I would love to meet my child's donor helpers, and I don't have any anxiety that she would feel more connected to them. They'd be strangers. We're her parents, right? That's kind of it.
But one thing that is interesting to me that I didn't conceptualize on the front end of this myself, even though I was embracing the known donation, was that somewhat if you do also go in a known donation and you're a donor, you're also opening yourself up to somebody else's fertility journey. And it possibly might not be, a simple one. It might be, just kind of opening yourself up to that again. And that is part of this, is that, we don't know what the whole story is going to look like. And I think knowing that it wasn't even a fear of mine, because I talk to fertility patients every day, and I have, this is all this is my world, and I love helping people through that. And I didn't expect like a perfect story for any of my recipients either, but it's like all of a sudden you have like this responsibility too, like, oh my gosh, that's my embryo. Like if it doesn't work, then you feel guilty. Like Maya mentioned, like, would you feel like, oh, I didn't have this, it didn't work for me. And like you have, like a recipient might feel that. Donors feel the same way sometimes too, like, oh my gosh, I feel responsible now. Like I did this to you. It wasn't just like some anonymous genetic contributor. Like this was, I let you down or something. And that's an interesting thing that you somehow have to find ways to integrate that piece too. Is that like, yeah, we're like the class of, I don't know, I'm the infertility warrior class of 2007 through 2010, and then again with my daughter. But this new generation of fertility warriors that are going through it right now, like they have their own stories, and you're in some ways joining somebody else through their fertility struggle. It can be both a good way to pay something forward, and it can be embracing difficulties again. And so just being kind of knowing that the journey is not, we don't know what it's going to look like. It is something you kind of have to be open to if you decide to do this in an open way or do it at all.
Yeah. And so we are way over. So
I know.
Clearly there's a lot.
Oh, just 30 minutes.
And we thank everybody for sticking around if you did. And we hope this was helpful. We know this is just like dipping our toes into these topics. And again, stay connected with us, because we want to know what people are really interested in talking more about, hearing more about. And we are rolling out a lot more resources. The education stuff is, going to come out probably in the next month or so. So within the next couple of months, a lot of stuff will be available. And so we're glad, and we're really grateful for everybody for being here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. Last slide. I completely forgot I was driving you guys. So I'm just if you're still around and you want to see our next slide, I'm going to figure out how to show it to you. I think
once good one, Gina.
Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm sorry. I forgot that I was supposed to be doing this, and now I cannot get that screen to share to save my life.
There's probably our website. That's just ourdonation.com. There's the Facebook, and there's that other
The Instagram.
the Instagram. So
Both
yeah,
are at Empower Donation. I apologize. Yeah, I'm really having difficulty
that's
getting
okay.
the screen to pop up so I can share it with you guys. But it's just talking about our Facebook and Instagram handles are at Empower Donation, and the survey will be sent by email if you're here live, and it will be it will be accessible if you're watching a recording of this. We'll also make sure it's in the comment section in YouTube, and we'll make sure that it's in inside the platform if you're accessing